Okay, so now we are going to move into the second lesson of the chemistry unit, which is on physical properties. Okay, so what is a property? Descriptions or characteristics of an item or substance can be divided into two groups, physical properties and chemical properties. So we are going to learn the difference between those. We're going to have a lot of specific examples of specific types of physical and chemical properties that we're going to go into. Some properties can be quantitative, so we learned what this means. Quantitative is describing using numbers. So for example, flash point of 451 degrees Celsius. So again, 451 is the number there. Another example of a quantitative numerical property would be something like density, which we will see, melting point, boiling point. These are all going to be describing a substance using numbers. Others can be qualitative. So this is describing using our senses, using words. So an example would be rubies are red. Red is a physical property of color, and that is describing something using words. If you were to describe odor and say that smells strong or sharp, that would be an example of using words, qualitative properties to describe a substance. So physical properties specifically is what we're going to talk about in this lesson. A physical description of a substance that may help to identify it. Does not involve making a new substance. So we're going to learn that the difference between physical and chemical properties is that a physical property is just describing a substance not as it changes into something new, whereas chemical is describing a substance as it changes from one substance into another, changes into a new substance. So physical property is not making a new substance. So again, some examples: color, taste, odor, texture. Okay, these are all examples of qualitative physical properties that are used to describe a substance. Okay, so we're going to go through a whole bunch of different physical properties. I'll describe their definition and provide you with an example for each. So here we see state, by definition, different phases of matter. So we learned matter is anything that has mass or volume, takes up space. It's made up of particles, and these particles, specifically the most basic unit we know is atoms. And the different states of matter are solids, liquids, and gases. You'll see here in this example, solid could be water as ice, okay, water in a solid state. Liquid could be water in a liquid state, and then we could have water vapor, which would be in its gaseous state. Next, we have color, determined visually by measurement of hue, saturation, and brightness. So you'll see as the example we have the visible spectrum of light there. So the visible spectrum is like the colors that we can see. So you'll notice they're like the colors of the rainbow. So we have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Next is odor. So this is characteristic scent or smell. Okay. So you'll see in the examples here, you could have something that smells fruity or sweet. So say something like orange juice or fruit juice. You can have something that smells sharp or strong. An example of that would be vinegar. And then you could have something that smells odorless. So say something like water. A lot of the time, unless it's dirty water, but water a lot of the time, say that comes out of your tap, is for the most part odorless. Okay, next we have luster. So the ability of a substance to reflect light. So we use our characteristic words or descriptive words here For luster, we use shiny or dull. So if something has the ability to reflect a lot of light or reflect light well, that's going to be something that's shiny, versus something that doesn't have the ability to reflect light, that's going to be something that's dull. So something dull would be like a rock, whereas an example of something shiny, a lot of the time bikes are made up of a shiny substance, that way that they are more like presentable looking or more appealing to the eye. Next we have clarity. So this is the ability to allow light to pass through a substance. So our descriptive words are transparent, which is something that allows light to completely pass through. So that would be just like a window. So that is glass that allows light to pass directly through. That's why we can see through it. Translucent would be an example of that, would be like a frosted glass. So some light can pass through, and that's why you would see someone on the other side as a little bit of a shadow. And then we have something that's called opaque, which is not allowing any light to pass through. So that would be something like a solid, like a book. It allows light to pass through. Hardness is the resistance to scratching or denting, so we would use words like hard or soft to describe. So something like a diamond, which is like the hardest substance, is very resistant to scratching or denting, so that would be described as hard, whereas something like titanium is very soft. It has a lower resistance to scratching. Okay, next we have malleability. The ability of a substance to be molded or flattened into a sheet. So when describing using this property, you would describe the substance as either being malleable or non-malleable or brittle. So something that can be molded or flattened is going to be malleable. Something that if you try to mold or flatten that breaks apart into a whole bunch of different pieces would be non-malleable or brittle. So if you think like a fork, you could bend a fork without breaking it into a million pieces. So that would be something that's made up out of a malleable material, or something like aluminum foil. So aluminum can be flattened or molded into a sheet. It can be bent. Whereas something like if you were to take a pen and try to mold or bend it, it would just break apart. Okay. Ductility, the ability to be drawn into long, thin wires. So you're either going to have a substance that's ductile or non-ductile. Something that can be drawn into long, thin wires would be considered ductile. So a good example of that are metals. Metals tend to easily be pulled into long wires, specifically copper. Copper is a good example of something that is ductile. Now we have viscosity. This is the resistance of a substance to being easily poured. So we have some examples over here. We're either going to describe using low or high viscosity. So if something has a low viscosity, it's going to be runny because it has less of a resistance to being poured. Whereas if something has a high viscosity, there is a greater resistance to being poured. So an example of something that has a lower viscosity, it's something that's going to flow easily like water, whereas syrup is something that's more resistance to flowing, it's thicker, and it's not going to flow as easily. Okay, now we have electrical conductivity, the ability of a substance to allow electric current to pass through it. So a good example of something that is conductive would be metals. Metals have the ability to conduct electricity. Okay, you could test something like this. If you were trying to make a light work, then you could test whether that substance that has the power running through it, if it actually has the ability for that power or that current to pass through it in order to turn the light on. Okay, something that will allow that to happen is a good conductor of electricity. Okay, form. This is the shape of the substance. So you'll see over here we have crystalline and amorphous. A good example of something that has a form or shape that is crystalline would be something like salt. Salt crystals, if you were to look under the microscope, have a very specific crystalline shape, whereas if you were to say like icing sugar or flour, these are more of a powder. Substances that are more of a powder, a fine powder, are considered amorphous. And then now we have solubility. So this is the ability of a substance to dissolve in a substance. So you can describe a substance as either being soluble or insoluble. So a good example of this would be if you were to take sugar or salt and dissolve it in water. It is soluble in water, so it has the ability to dissolve, whereas there's other substances that wouldn't dissolve in water, so they would be considered insoluble. Okay, now we have density, the amount of mass per unit volume of a substance. So we're going to have a whole lesson on density. When describing using this property, if something's heavy, you would consider it to be more dense. If something is light, it's less dense. So you could have a rock that's heavy, very dense, or feathers that are light, that are less dense. Melting point, the temperature at which a substance changes state from a solid to a liquid. So we know state is solid, liquid, gas. So when a substance has reached its melting point, that is when it changes from a solid state to a liquid state. So it would be like ice changing state at 0 degrees Celsius. Okay, so at 0 degrees, ice would change from a solid to a liquid. Boiling point, the temperature at which a substance changes state from a liquid to a gas. So this would be like if you were to boil water, when that water begins to bubble, you can see the steam or the gas. That's when the water in liquid form is beginning to change to water in gas form. Okay, you'll see that as like water vapor, steam. So that's liquid to gas. Okay, so here we're looking at metallic properties. So these are properties of metals. So metals tend to have metallic properties. These are properties that, physical properties that are going to describe metals. So metals tend to be very conductive. Okay, so they have the ability to conduct electricity. They're very ductile. So again, if we think about the definition, the ability to be drawn into long, thin wires, so like copper. Metals are malleable, so they can be molded or flattened or bent, and luster. Okay, so metals tend to be shiny in luster. Okay, so they have the ability to reflect light. Sorry guys, my computer just froze, so I'm not sure if we got this slide, so I'm going to just quickly go over it one more time. If it didn't freeze and you did hear me, then you can just skip right through the video. So it says here metallic properties. So these are going to be physical properties that describe metals. So metals are conductive. They have the ability to produce electricity or conduct electricity. They are very ductile, okay? So the ability to be drawn into long, thin wires, that would be an example like copper. Malleable, so metals can be flattened or molded. and luster. So we usually describe metals as being shiny. They have the ability to reflect light. Okay, characteristic physical properties. Properties used to help identify substances in labs, unique for each substance. So this is saying that there are specific properties that are fixed for specific substances, or very unique for a specific substance. So substances tend to have fixed points. This includes the boiling point and the melting point. So these are like number values. Boiling point is the temperature at which a liquid will form a gas. Okay, so we said changing state from a liquid to a gas. Melting point is the temperature at which a solid will become a liquid, so changing state from solid to liquid. Okay, so liquid to gas, solid to liquid. These two temperatures are the same value for a specific substance. So 0 degrees Celsius is the freezing point of water and the melting point of ice. So different substances freeze or melt at very specific, unique temperatures. So this can be used to identify a pure substance. It can even be used to help estimate purity of a sample. So again, these physical properties are very unique to a specific substance. So if you don't know what a substance is, if it's unknown, you could determine its boiling point or its melting point, and based off of that numerical value, that could help you to distinguish what the substance is, because again, these fixed points are unique to each substance. So again, 0 degrees for water is water's freezing point, and ice's melting point. Okay, very specific values for water specifically. Physical properties are useful. So diamonds are, so this, guys, is like real life application. So you're probably thinking, like, where is this used in the real world? How does this science apply? And it very much does. So these physical properties are useful for diamonds. Diamonds are very hard. They're used to cut many metals. Copper conducts electricity very well and is used for wiring in homes and businesses. So it's important that we know this property about copper and that it can conduct electricity, because so that copper can be used in homes. Water absorbs heat well and is used to cool car engines with the aid of antifreeze. So again, this is something, a property, a physical property that is very important about water, that allows us to use antifreeze. Some metals melt at relatively low temperatures. They are used for fuses and circuits. Okay, so again, just some real life application here. Okay guys, so that was physical properties. You have a little bit of practice on page 8 in your booklet.